All right. Well, welcome, folks. Thank you so much for coming to our session. We're going to be talking about um, Health Data Commons, which is going to be looking at the Global Open Research Commons International Model, which is a group in RDA as well. There's a session later today if you want to attend that one too. And this is really going to be giving it a discipline-specific focus on health, profiling towards fair convergence. This is not a group that's active yet in regards to profiling the GORC model. This is why it's birds of a feather. So I'm hoping we can have some cool discussions and learn a little bit along the way, maybe towards a working group. My name is CJ Woodford. I am a project manager at the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. And I'm also a co-chair of the GORC International Model Working Group and the interest group, kind of. We also have another speaker, Lauren. Lauren, would you like to introduce yourself quickly?
Sure. So my name is Lauren Maxwell. I sit at Universitätsklinikum Heidelberg in Heidelberg, Germany, and I have been working with CJ on developing this working group. Yeah, and we're really excited for you all to be here.
All right, and so just a couple of housekeeping things, I guess, before we jump in. The session is recorded, as you heard. We're going to be hopefully having an open kind of Q&A where people can raise their hands and then unmute. We don't have a big group today, but we think that that's probably the best way to do it. And um, I don't know if there's any other housekeeping things. They're out of my brain. Lauren, can you remember anything else?
Let's see. So I think since we are a small group, we've said that folks can feel free to raise their hands and just raise comments or questions as they come up. And again, most of us will focus on discussion. We'll go through the draft case statement with folks.
Yeah. All right, so welcome new RDA members, because of course we want to welcome everyone who's joining new, and thank you for coming to a Birds of a Feather session if you are a new member. That's kind of a big way to jump straight in. Um, RDA is a great place to be, and we hope that you enjoy it. There's lots of great things to do, and we're glad that you're here at the BoF session. All right, there is a collaborative meeting notes. We've shared it in the chat. Lauren will share it again now in a second, hopefully, and just to make sure that you go in and you do add your name to the attendee list. We've also got links to these slides and the draft case statement and the version 1 GORC model, because that was endorsed by RDA back in October. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go. But please go ahead and have a look at the collaborative meeting notes. That's the place to find everything. And so you don't have to worry about taking screenshots or anything of the slides. You'll have access to them. All right, so icebreakers. It's polls on Whova, and we've already identified that one of the questions was not set up correctly, so I apologize. You'll see maybe more questions than I had intended. But we're kind of asking, do you or your organization currently work with health data? So let's focus on that one first. It would be cool if we can, um, publish polls. Let's see if we can see answers already. Currently work with health data. So I'll give people another few seconds to work on that one. If there's any more. There's one on how well would you rate your organization on using fair best practices? And I know that maybe some of my options seem the same, but the idea was essentially, is your organization using a lot of fair best practices in everything you do? It's a core piece of how you work, all the way down to you're the only person in your organization that even knows what fair is. There's no best practices enabled. And you're trying to get that process started. So it's a real range, and we're just trying to see where people are. And then where do you or your organization find fair best practices currently? So if you were to say start a new DMP platform, or your organization wants to support researchers, say in creating DMPs or data management plans, you might say, okay, well, how do I make a fair data management plan? Where would you go to find such a template or to ensure that your process would be fair? That's kind of what we're asking. And I know there's many places you might go for this, but this is kind of intended to be, where would be your go-to first? Where would you first look? All right, let's have a look at what Hoopa says. All right, view results. Do you work with health data? Yes. No. So okay, that's not a big surprise. Most people are going to that attend the health session are going to be working with health data. Love to see it. Excellent. Um, so these are going to remain open, but we're just going to take a look at snapshots. All right, how well do you would you say the word fair best practices? Okay, good. This was a trick answer. This was a trick option, 100% fair and everything. Nobody should be saying that. That's not possible. Uh, some few and some are starting to implement. Okay, so it's really cool to see that no one's at this bottom level, which is also fine, by the way. No, it's also fine to be starting, but it's interesting to see that no one's at quite at that level. We've all got some experience with FAIR and organizations are interested in taking part. So that's pretty awesome. And let's see. This might still be the word cloud. No, okay, poll results. Okay, people look at Elixir resources, the cookbook, fair sharing for sure, and Go Fair Foundation. Um, oh, that's cool. Cologne Competence Center for Research Data Management. I haven't heard of that one myself. So this is also what's nice about these polls is that we get to learn from you as well, which is really helpful, especially for this BoF and potential working group. So please feel free to continue to look at the polls, but we'll move on from there. Our agenda today, we just did the welcome and icebreakers. Thank you so much. Lauren's going to start us off with an introduction to FAIR. I'll talk a little bit about the Global Open Research Commons GORC model. We'll then move into the main part of our session today, which is actually going to be looking at parts of the case statement and discussing it with all of you and hopefully getting your feedback and interest. We're then going to look at your classic BoF session calls for co-chairs, members, recommendations for for people to be involved. And then we'll finish up with some next steps and wrap up. All right, Lauren, take us away. You just let me know when you want the slide changed.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you, CJ. So yes, again, welcome everybody. So I don't, maybe if we could just get a show of hands of how many people are familiar with the GORC working group. So the Global Open Research Commons working group that's been actually ongoing since 2019. Okay, yeah, Foma, we know you're familiar with it. Okay, so we'll give you a bit more of the history, but just to let you know that this Birds of a Feather and this proposed working group is really coming from a working group that has been very successful called the Global Open Research Commons working group, and we'll speak a little bit more about that. So what we would like to do with this working health data commons. So rather than thinking about global open research commons, we're kind of narrowing in on a particular focus on health data commons. And the objective here is to think about how do these health data commons relate to each other and how do they relate to data commons in other spaces. You can go to the next slide. DJ. Okay, so when we think about health data commons, and we'll talk again more about this, the real challenge here is semantic and syntactic interoperability of health data. So we really want to get to a point where we can conduct what is called federated analysis over health data commons. We can reuse the data across health data commons without having to move the data. Because in the realm of health data, we're thinking about sensitive data. There are a lot of access issues and privacy concerns, and there are also legal barriers to accessing those data. And so we'd like to reuse the data without directly accessing the data. And to do that, we need high quality data, we need high quality metadata, and then we need semantic and syntactic interoperability of those persistent level data. And we think that once we get to that point, so we're definitely not there yet, but we'd like to understand where we are, then we can do a better job of detecting and responding to global health challenges. So those could be infectious disease challenges like the pandemic that we just have gotten through. They can be infectious disease challenges that we know about. So outside of the context of emerging infectious disease, and they can also be non-communicable diseases, and there are other serious threats like antimicrobial resistance that really we need kind of global cooperation and global data to address. So that's what we're working towards here. And when we have fair metadata that describe the types of data and other concerns of health data commons, then we can better understand where do we need to invest to think about moving towards interoperability. So interoperability, not just at the data level, but interoperable governance, interoperable access conditions, interoperable other types of interoperability. Next slide. Let's see. So when we're thinking about this particular working group, you can go to the next slide, CJ. Then we are, so what we hope to get out of this working group is defining and then providing metadata on the different parts of a health data commons. And then what we think we can get out of that is that this metadata will help us understand what investments we need to make to put together, for example, thinking about emerging issues in antimicrobial resistance. We can also think about how we could invest to link human health data to oceans data or climate data or animal health data. And then we can also think about what investments we need to make to think about how non-communicable diseases are related to ocean health or are related to environmental exposures. So some of the key questions that we're looking at here are what national or transnational health data commons exist or are planned. So we know that there's quite a bit of investment in digital public infrastructure around health data. And some of that investment is at kind of let's say the regional level or the state or department level or the province level. And then some of those investments are at the country level or the transnational level. So examples that come to mind are Health RI in Netherlands, the Malaysian health data space, the European health data space. And then there are many kind of sub-initiatives. So there are many initiatives in the digital public infrastructure space around health data that are within hospital systems or regions, as I mentioned. So what we'd like to focus on here are really the country level or the transnational health data commons. So how are those developing? What domains and types of health data are included in those health data commons? What stakeholders are engaged in the development of those health data commons, and how are we engaging them? And then who are the relevant stakeholders, regardless of whether or not they're engaged in the development of the health data commons? And what are their priorities for health data commons convergence? So when we think about, the metadata that we need to think about the intersections between these health data commons, where do folks want to invest? What types of interoperability are they looking for, and what types of outcomes are they looking for? So next slide. So when we think about how this relates to FAIR, so going back to the poll that CJ put together, we're interested in understanding how health data commons have implemented FAIR. How are they connecting data types? So what types of persistent identifiers are being used? What data types are connected? So in health data, we know that we're oftentimes dealing with siloed data, where human omics data are separate from pathogenomics data, are separate from clinical data, are separate from research data, are separate from sample metadata or sample data. And then what data reuse modalities are covered now? So how can those data be accessed? What do plans for federated data reuse look like? And then how is data governance being executed? So how are decisions made about data reuse? Who is making those decisions? What's the process for authentication and authorization to reuse the data? Next slide. And then one of the strengths, I mean, there are many strengths of the GORC implementation model, but one of the strengths is a focus on key performance indicators. So how do we know if we're effectively building and managing our data commons? What are the types of key performance indicators that demonstrate the success of those investments in data commons? So we're thinking about that. What types of KPIs are being used in the health data space? And then what types of measures do we have to prevent or to identify and address data security concerns? So how are health data commons, which are working with sensitive data, addressing data security. Next slide. So when we think about this work, what we're really interested in doing is defining the metadata that we need to understand connections between, or lack thereof, between health data commons at the country or the transnational level. We're really looking for metadata. So we're not saying that what we like to propose for this group is that this is not about best practice. This is about providing metadata so that other groups can understand what groups that are already implementing commons are doing. And part of why we think that that's important is in the health data space, there are many, many ways to implement FAIR. And so when we have a shared implementation of FAIR, we can work towards FAIR convergence. And the importance there is that there are so many different standards for data capture, data exchange that we have in the health data space, that when we can show other people what standards we're using, then those other people in our domain may also want to adopt those standards, because we know that just understanding which standards to adopt is itself a barrier. So that's part of what we'd like to do here, is make the metadata on how groups are approaching semantic interoperability visible, so that other groups can at least understand what other groups are doing. And then we want to work with the end users, so the folks who are likely to use these network graphs from the metadata to define what metadata is important to them, so that then the outputs of this research group, or sorry, working group are useful to the health data commons that are already ongoing or being planned. And then what we're looking at here is FAIR as a continuum, not a binary. So we're not saying that this is fair and that's not fair. We're saying that there are gradients of FAIR, and there's a lot of tooling to support the adoption of FAIR. And in this working group, we have a chance to make visible the ongoing efforts to implement FAIR, the challenges that groups are facing when they implement FAIR, and then the tools that they're using to implement FAIR to try to facilitate FAIR adoption for other health data commons. And one thing we're not suggesting is that all health data commons implement FAIR in the same way. Rather, we're suggesting that by making visible how groups are implementing FAIR of where investments are needed, and what we would need to do to try to get towards the type of interoperability for participant level and metadata to really enable federated data reuse across commons. Next slide. So we are going to jump over to CJ to give you some more background on the Global Open Research Commons work.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. So Lauren set the stage for the kind of work that we want to do, and this idea around we're not actively going to be working on the best practices that health data commons can or should, and we wouldn't even use those action words anyway for this, but that they might, like, we're not going to be working on the best practices themselves, but we want to say what best practices are being used and how and where, and on what, and depending on what the situation is. And so to kind of put that into perspective and give us a place to start on, as Lorna said, all the different standards and procedures that are in place, as well as identify the gaps, we're going to be using the Global Open Research Commons, or GORC, model for that. And so I'm going to be running through this a little bit quickly because this isn't really a session on GORC. The GORC interest group and working group does have its own session and sessions. So there's one later today and there's another one next week, a repeat session. But just to give you a taste, if you haven't come across it before, what we're really doing with the GORC is saying that it's a coordination across initiatives to interoperate research commons themselves. So the Global Open Research Commons is a network of research commons. The realized vision of a GORC would be providing frictionless access to all research artifacts, including but not limited to things like data, publications, software, and compute resources, relying on metadata, vocabulary, and identification services, being available to everyone, everywhere, at all times, with the right protocols and procedures in place to promote authorization, authentication, and security. So there is the GORC interest group, um, which provides a neutral space where people have conversations around open research commons, and how we can work towards a GORC. Um, and their job is kind of to create a roadmap for how do we get global alignment to help set the priorities for commons development and integration. And you kind of need a roadmap to get to that larger GORC piece. The International Model Working Group, or the GORC IM Working Group, operated under the umbrella of the interest group. It's still active, but kind of edging towards maintenance mode, or it might get started up as a completely different working group, not this one, later on. And this group's goal was to create an international model. So really identifying what what are the considerations, what goes into a research commons. Um, it didn't have an implementation map or anything like that in terms of how would you create a commons. We're going to be diving into that a little bit with the health profile on top of the model, but this was kind of the starting point. And so the idea was that the model will feed into the roadmap to say this is what you need to consider. The roadmap will pick up the what and the how, the implementation piece, and lead us into this larger network of research commons that are interoperable and can work together. All right, so the model had a lot of work that went into it. It's not just a model that we made up. Um, I hope people don't feel like that. That's sometimes what I'm afraid of. But there was actually a lot of work that went into this. So the working group itself has been active since 2019, I think was the official first meeting, um, or the first BoF session, and then meetings started in 2021. And for the creation of the model itself, we did a couple of stages of really intense literature review. It was over 150 sources. FAIR was a big feeder into the literature review, as well as lots of digital research infrastructure publications around FAIR. Um, we had a speaker series where we had 12 different speakers that all fed into the model. So this kind of went through an iterative process with our working group through 4 plenary sessions with RDA. This is now going to be our 5th. A workshop. We had 26 meetings. We've had more now, but for the creation of the version 1 of the model, it was 26 meetings. We had 69 members at the time and 6 dedicated task groups that met um, regularly. So much more frequently than the working group. Some of these task groups would meet once or twice a week for 8 months straight. So it was quite a lot of work that went into that. And so that process kind of led to the model itself, which is about 400 specific items, including KPIs that Commons may wish to consider as they build up or expand. The model is kind of structured around the GORC interest group's essential elements, which are listed here. But what I wanted to highlight is we have these top levels essential elements, which are that every Commons should have something within these essential elements, but which items in the model your commons or your organization leans towards or develops is completely a unique choice and up to you. There is no one right way or best way to create a commons. It's all very context specific. But just for an overview of the essential elements, at least, they included human elements and technical elements, including governance structures, rules of participation and access, sustainability. And I know there's a $sign in here, but it also included things like transition plans and ensuring you have sustainability of operations, um, engagement with your community, human capacity to the commons itself. So the people actually internally working for your organization, you need to think about them, whether they're volunteers or paid. And a central component, which is interoperability and standards and conventions. Interoperability and standards and conventions is both a human element and a technical element because they also encompass things like procedure. In terms of technical elements, then there's the compute, storage, network, and authorization authentication infrastructure, your services and tools, and of course, your research objects or research artifacts, depending on the terminology you prefer. The model also had a selection of key performance indicators and metrics that matched with the items in the model. And so it wasn't a complete one-to-one. There weren't 400, there isn't 200 KPIs and metrics and 200 items in the model. But there is about 96 KPIs and metrics. So there's lots in there to think about when you're thinking around how do we measure success, or is this the right metric for us? The model is structured based on entities and characteristics. So it starts at the essential elements. Essential elements can have categories and categories can have subcategories. all of these things can have attributes, which is a main characteristic, and attributes can be further subdivided into features. And so if an essential element has an attribute and that attribute has a feature, that essential element has an attribute and a feature. If that essential element has a category, that category inherits those characteristics. And likewise, if the category has a subcategory, all those characteristics are inherited again. And so the model is flat in a spreadsheet. We are working on a different container, and that is something that we want this working group to do. We're working on the health profile to focus on, as well as making things a little bit more friendly. The GORC interest groups and what we're going to be proposing later today is a new working group as well. We'll look at different formats for it, but this is how it currently is. And the links are in the collaborative notes for this if you want to go have a look at it. We also are happy for people to leave comments. Please don't edit it, but we're happy for you to leave comments on it if you like. So that's the very fast overview of the GORC model. We're very happy to answer questions and whatnot about that, just realizing that there is also a GORC session later today as well as next week. But that's the container for the work that we're hoping to do here to give us a first starting point. And what I might also add about the GORC model in relation to this work, before we jump into the draft case statement, is that we're not really, we know that the GORC model needs work. We've got a version 1.0 that was endorsed in October of last year, and we're already making plans for how do we make a version 2.0 and beyond. And what we are hoping with the health profiling of the GORC model is not just identifying which fair practices are maybe aligned with different parts of the model, but also identifying what parts of the model need to be expanded or edited or completely dropped out for health data commons in particular. So it's really going to be a back and forth between the GORC model as a container and this on all the implementation pieces around fair best practice that'll go into it. Am I doing this part, Lauren, or did you want to talk about value deliverables and scope? I think I made it, but
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry. Okay. So again, we're not actually writing the best practices. That's not what this group is going to be about. That's a much larger body of work that has a lot of groups working on it. What we want to do is supply the metadata about health data commons and around their fair best practices to describe what they're doing. And that's to help health data commons relate to each other, to use the same language around what they're doing and what they want to do, and help identify gaps. So the deliverables that we want to have is the health data commons profile of the GORC model. Which items stay, which items get changed, which items maybe need further detail. From that information, we're hoping to generate a network graph describing the actual or planned implementation of health data commons using the health data commons GORC profile. So this would be a visual, hopefully some sort of visual or interactive representation around what are these health data commons doing around fair implementation and how do they fit within the GORC model? How does the model describe them? And if we have time, thinking a little bit further around fair assessment, because that's a whole kettle of fish that needs to be discussed too. But that's very much an if we have time and within scope and limits, third deliverable. All right, Lauren, over to you.
Yeah, great, thanks. So we have two ways that we'd like to identify country level or cross-national health data commons. And we're taking a broad definition of health data commons. We're not sticking to whether or not the commons have called themselves commons. Rather, we're taking the GORC definition of commons and applying that. So just as an example, the European health data space doesn't call itself a commons, but it would fit under our definition of commons and also meet the criteria of being a country level or transnational health data commons. So this work actually comes from co-data from the sensitive health data case study working group. So we started this work in co-data some time ago, and then we've brought it to RDA to really take advantage of the co-data, the GORC implementation model, and use that work as a starting point for describing these health data commons. So we some time ago kind of registered our intention to conduct what's called a scoping review. So scoping review is it has kind of two components. One is a systematic search to identify eligible studies, and then kind of it's a qualitative summary of those studies to understand the state of the literature. So from the scoping review, we didn't think we would identify that many health data commons, and we identified some. So this is just the Prisma diagram for that. Let's see, CG, actually go to the next slide. So for this, to identify the studies, we are going to lean more heavily on what's called snowball sampling. So snowball sampling means you go to health data commons like Health RI, and you say, okay, what are the other health data commons that you're aware of? Because many of these health data commons are not registered in the literature. And so that is work that is ongoing, and we will basically conduct during the lifetime of the working group. And so what we're going to do here is just ask our colleagues who are working on health data commons to identify the health data commons that they're aware of, and then we'll ask those health data commons for health data commons that they're aware of. And the goal here is really to bring in folks who are planning health data commons, because their inputs are as valuable as the inputs of health data commons that have already been established or are further along in the implementation process. And those are who we're thinking of as some of our stakeholders here. So part of what we wanted to get to today is, health data is a really large space. And so part of what we'd like to get out of this scoping review, so when we summarize the literature, and also through the discussion series where we host health data commons to speak about, what type of data they're planning to include in their commons, what we'd like to really understand from folks is when, there's a group like Health RI, or there's a group like ADRC that's working on establishing a health data commons at the country level or the cross-national level, like EHDS, what types of health data are they including? So is it just going to be data from medical records? Are they also going to include research data? Will this research data include observational data and intervention data? What is the status of human and pathogen omics data and the representation of that in the health data commons? What about high dimensional imaging data, sample metadata or digitized samples, and then surveillance data? So again, this is a chance to discuss. So there could be other types of health data that we should consider here that are not included, like claims data is not listed here, for example. So we're happy to obviously revise this list. We want to revise this list with the members of the working group. And yeah, that's, let's see, CG, you could go to the next slide, I think. So for our, so I think at this point we can move over actually to the case statement itself, if you agree. So this is the draft case statement. It's open for comments, and what we so for anybody who's new to RDA, there's a format for these case statements, and then the case statement has a review period, and then goes through an endorsement after the review period, and then if it's endorsed, you can form your working group within RDA. So there's a kind of transparent multi-step process for getting your working group approved, and we are in the early phases of this. So just have developed a draft case statements. And then what we do in the case statement is just define why we think this work is important. What is the purpose of this? What will the outcomes be? And then how this work relates to other work that's happening within RDA or beyond RDA. And also what the timeline and the deliverables from the working group will be. Let's see. And then one thing that all RDA working groups have are co-chairs. The co-chairs are responsible for leading the execution of the work plan, and leading subgroups that do a lot of the work to move the working group forward. And then we've also applied for and received support from the RDA Tiger team. So the RDA Tiger team is going to help us in facilitating meetings, taking meeting notes, and then also doing outreach for the working group. So recruiting members and helping with the speaker series. Yeah. So maybe CJ, do you want to, we can just go through kind of each section of the,
Yeah, and maybe before we jump headfirst into the case statement, let's take a pause because Lauren and I have both covered a lot of material. We've, given the objective of the working group, the background for the containers and the reasons of why we want to do the work. And so this is a good time before we actually jump into the more detailed pieces around like the work plan and what we have written in the case statement already, for folks to ask questions around anything we've talked about so far. And especially if you um, have concerns about how this might work, or you think it's a good idea, we're open to any of that feedback. Or if anything we said wasn't clear, this is a good time to address those. All right, there's one hand. Go ahead.
Yes. So I have a little bit background noise. I hope it's not bothering you. Just shout out if it is. Great, this is really nice info. I was just wondering if you were more on the side of the co-development together and putting things into place, or also on following up on the actual implementation. Because I can imagine that doing things on a theoretical level sounds all very well, and well, it still might be very challenging to align between all the different, like there's lots of variety within the different domains and the different questions and the different elements to put in such a model. But if you go forward to the real implementation, do you have plans there as well, or follow up, or work with like use cases or best practices, or just wondering how you go about that?
Yeah, so I might switch back over to here and just quickly go through the work plan because that's a really good question and it's something that Lauren and I have been thinking about a lot. Um, so ideally, we would want to have people actually involved in a speaker series. So the months don't really matter here. They're estimates on our part, but ideally we would actually be working with Health Data Commons, and they might not call themselves commons. Like it's really folks that kind of fit under that umbrella of you're providing research infrastructure or storage or some sort of provision for health data, whether that's practice or research based. And we want to reach out to them. We want to do that snowballing sampling that Lauren has mentioned, discuss the initiative, develop a questionnaire for them, invite them to a speaker series. So ideally, we would actually have these groups come into we'd have the commons or these spaces come into the working group and talk about what they're doing so far with this questionnaire as a baseline to guide that discussion around implementation and their fair practices on the ground. We would then do like an iterative repetition of the model to say what pieces are being represented by our speakers and the people who aren't in the speaker series but have filled out a questionnaire around their experiences and their use right now, and what implementations do they have. So we're actually hoping to build out not just the model, but the actual implementations. What are they doing and where are they finding their best practices currently? You can see that's like a 2 to 12 months and 4 to 13 months. This is going to be like a serious iterative process, and it's very similar to what we did with the GORC model as well. But this time actually focusing on how are you doing it, not just what. As you said, like we want to focus on implementation, not just theory at this point. The idea then is once we've got a version 0.9 of this model with the implementations listed that we've heard of so far, we'd actually reconvene everyone in the speaker series and in the questionnaires and through our snowball sampling, anyone who's available and interested to come back and look at it themselves. And to have revise and make suggestions at that point for additional implementations we might have missed, or pieces of the model that need to be added that aren't captured. The network graph would be the last part, but then in these last couple of months, once we've got a version 1.0 that the larger group, not just the working group, but the group of speakers and people filling out questionnaires agree with, is that we actually want to go back specifically to the AMR and cancer subdomains, and do adoption in those two spaces first. So this is not to say those are the only two people that we'd like to see using the model and do more use cases, but those are the two that we identified as use cases for the first round. And that's simply because of time. It's an 18-month working group, right? We can't do much more than two use cases while also developing a model with implementations and a network graph. But yes, so we do want use cases. We do want to have them in there, and that is the plan. There's more details in the actual case statement document, but that's kind of the rough overview of how we're thinking. We'll have the working group actually interacting with the Health Data Commons space and have the Health Data Commons themselves working with the working group and having a very strong voice into what this looks like. Does that answer your question? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, but I do have a follow-up question, if it's okay, if you
For
just want to
sure.
continue with the presentation. No. Okay. So as you've said already, there are all these different elements within the commons. And if I kind of translate that, because I haven't been using the term commons in my organization, I'm from Health RI, Netherlands, and we are building this infrastructure, but I've never called it commons, which isn't bothering me that much. But I do want to adopt standard vocabulary as well. But it's kind of a very diverse infrastructure. So there are infrastructural parts, there are fair parts, there are LC elements, there are services, things you need to arrange. There's this organization that you need to take care of. So how broad do you plan to go, or do you kind of want to focus, because it depends on use cases as well in the presentations that you just shared. So how specific would those AMR and cancer subdomain applications be, depending on what we bring in? Are you looking for variety, or are you looking for focus and doing a few things really well? I'm just curious.
I'm going to give a short answer, and then I'm going to point it over to Lauren to give a long answer, maybe. So the short answer would be the model would be the variety, general, higher level piece with some specific examples, but the use cases or the adoption profiles at the end would be in-depth, every item, specific requirements. So that's kind of what we would be aiming for. Lauren, what do you think?
Cool.
Yeah, and I so we have a slide where we just show you very briefly the GORC implementation model and the different domains and attributes that are covered by that model. And so we're using kind of all the work that went into that here, and that is this kind of higher level implementation to really describe kind of the meta level connections across these health data commons. And then exactly like CJ said, for the case studies, so AMR and cancer is what we're proposing. We'd go more in depth to think about, okay, what's really needed to enable federated reuse of AMR data or cancer data, given how these are collected at the country level.
Thanks so much. Really nice, makes sense.
That's really fun. Makes sense.
Yeah, that's really. I'd say we also so we have kind of what we're starting with, which is our vision. It comes a lot from GORC, from this prior working group, but we are also open to changing direction. So we don't want to go completely kind of off course from GORC, but I do think the point of having the end users involved in this entire process is to make it useful to the folks who are developing country level or transnational health data commons. And thinking about, wanting to reuse these data in a federated approach across this common. So we're open to shifting our approach.
Yeah, that was exactly the reason why I was asking the first question on implementation, because the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So it might be the case that you have this very great model that in practice it doesn't work either, because you have a different strategy within your organization, or your organization is too small or too big, or it just doesn't work, or you don't have the expertise. So I think based on that, organizations do focus a little bit or go very broad and might not go deep because they go broad. So we'll be curious what comes out of this working group to be started. Yeah.
Omar, yeah.
Hello. So I have been following some of the work of the GORC and contributing some as well. I am very interested in applications of it. I'm also involved in some health-related projects, not directly kind of being inside of the healthcare system or those who are building those structures. But do you have those people on board already with this idea? And do you think they are in the RDA community? I mean, how do you imagine that you would engage these health research infrastructure organizations that you listed in the proposal, for example? Do you know if they're already represented in the RDA? And if not, how would you plan to bring them on here?
So I think I'm going to let Lauren take this largely. We have identified some health infrastructures already. We have members of the GORC working group that are involved with some of them too. So we'll be reaching out through media contacts on my side, but I'm going to pass it over to Lauren because she's actually in the health space.
Sure. So this is a good question. So we've done, we've had kind of informal conversations with a number of health data spaces. So folks from Health RI, folks from that are working on the health data space in Australia. Trying to think who else. Folks from the African Population Health Research Center. And what we need to do now is basically spread the word. So I think a lot of I think the folks who are leading these initiatives are unlikely to be part of RDA, but I think everybody, all of those groups are going to have folks kind of within that umbrella, like for example, the folks from Health RI that are here today, who are part of RDA. So I do think that probably there are people who are part of RDA from each of these initiatives. I think the trick is through snowball sampling, we really like to get the folks who are at the very early stages of thinking about this, thinking about what they, what types of data they want to put in their comments, how those data are going to be made fair, how they're going to address all the issues that you need to address when you're creating a health data commons, because again, we see this opportunity for like making the metadata available from commons that are more advanced, like Health RI, for example, can then help groups that are just starting their commons. And then through that kind of shared implementation, we can get to fair convergence. So we'll have an easier time of federating across commons and reusing data in a federated approach once those commons get off the ground. So that's really our version here, is to start kind of early and provide this metadata early. So we've developed a pitch deck that we're going to use to basically pitch folks from Health Data Commons and sending somebody from their group to this working group. So we talked to Adrian Burton, who's working on developing the Health Data Commons for Australia. And Adrian had done kind of a tour of Health Data Commons in Europe. So he had gone and visited Health RI. He'd gone and talked to the people from the German Swarm Learning Network and from Gaia X. And he went to talk to the folks in Spain who were working on Health Data Commons in Spain. He talked to the folks from Estonia. So there are, and that's just one person that we know because they're sitting in our network. So we'd like to just identify folks who are already kind of working on understanding what other health data commons are doing, and then use those networks to try to bring these people in so we can be more systematic about kind of identifying and recruiting health data commons, that we can all share this information together, as opposed to just one health data commons has gone out and done kind of a tour of health data commons, but then those information are not present for the rest of us. So that's the intention here. We have the pitch deck. We are going to pilot the pitch deck with folks that we have in our networks, and then reach out to other groups. So that's our plan. Yeah, but I think this.
Yeah, and I might just add that one thing that we are hoping to get out of today is to think about who should we be reaching out to. So we have a list that I kind of threw in the slide here, but there's also lists of people down below in our, I know that our value proposition and everything is really long, bear with us. So we've got like some lists of folks that we wrote in our in some of our proposal documentation. that I put in the slides as well. We've got groups that we want to work with within RDA that hopefully have contacts too. But we are absolutely not above cold calling people and cold emailing, which is something that is also on the table. So it's kind of we're reaching out to as many folks as will respond back to us, but using our networks first. Thanks, Walmart. Any other questions or concerns about anything we've talked about so far? Because we've covered a lot. We've done the work draft, we've done the reasoning for it. Anything else before we dive kind of more into the case statement itself? All right, I don't see hands raised and I don't see anything in the chat, but please feel free to raise your hand at any time because we're heading in towards like the last half of our session. And we really do want this to be open to discussion and answering people's questions because that's what the space is for. So I might just mention around, this is something that we're interested in getting today, and then we'll switch over to the case statement document is what other health data commons, research infrastructures that might also be called data spaces, or other groups in general should be involved. Like that's really what we want to start with and get that, not necessarily that today would be Snowball sampling, I guess, technically, but getting those starting points down would be really helpful. And then if there are any other stakeholders that we should be thinking about or including, especially in that first round speaker series and that sort of thing. At the bottom of the document, you'll see that there's a need for members and co-chairs. And if you want to be a co-chair, email me and Lauren. Again, you'll have access to this deck and our emails are also in the case statement, so you're not going to lose that. But have a think about it. Let us know. All right, so Lauren, how would you like to go through this? Where do you think is the best place to start?
Yeah, so I feel like the rationale, maybe folks, does the rationale seem clear to folks that are just in the room now, like why we think this could be important and what the value of this could be? Because obviously we need to refine our pitch, so. Okay. So I think when we read through this text, so we've, like as CJ pointed out, we have maybe too much text. We can narrow it down. And part of that is just, the iterative process of working with, writing with multiple people. But I think what we'd like to make clear here is how this work is really coming from the GORC IM, because as CJ pointed out, there's just so much work that went into that and so much thinking and so much literature review. So we're starting from a really solid foundation. And then we'd like to basically try to make clear to folks, what would be the value of having these metadata. So not just about the type of standards, for example, that are implemented for different data types across these different health data commons, but also how health data commons are addressing governance or how they're addressing the care principles, how they are addressing measures of success, like we talked about, key performance indicators. So we see all of that as valuable in making those data, the metadata related to those different domains or attributes, making that visible. We see that as really helping commons that are starting their planning process and helping the folks who are interested in understanding how we can conduct federated analysis across commons, and also link health data to other types of data. So we'd like to make those points stand out. And one of the issues that became clear to us in our kind of early pitches to folks who are building health data commons is that they felt like we were being prescriptive. So saying, look, this is how you implement FAIR in health data commons, or this is best practice in FAIR implementation. And we'd like to step away from that and really focus on defining and then collecting high quality metadata to understand the intersections of commons, rather than saying this is, these are the standards we think that commons should implement, or this is the standard that you should use for omics data. So we want to make sure that our language is really not prescriptive, but more focused on just, providing metadata and letting commons make decisions about how they're going to implement these different concerns, but like providing providing the metadata to show other commons or show other stakeholders, who are not developing commons, what they're doing. So I guess if that kind of if those points aren't coming across well in the text, then we need to refine the text.
We do have a question in the chat around people who are involved, which I think is also helpful. Who is involved from Health RI, and is it Rob Hooft?
So I talked to Ruben about this. I haven't talked to Rob about it. But I told Ruben that we were doing this. But again, we have to go back to Health RI. So what CJ and I have been working on is basically building this out, building out the pitch deck, obviously getting ready for this session. And then subsequent to this, we have to go back. So I did tell Ruben about this a couple months ago. We've talked to other folks, but then we need to go back and say, look, this is started and we'd like to find somebody, so ideally I think we will have kind of buy-in from folks because there's so many shared challenges. It's just really useful to understand how different groups are approaching these challenges. And so I think Ruben said he was interested when I spoke to him. So I do think that the folks who are building these out will see the value, as long as we can be clear that we're not trying to get people to move in a certain direction. We're just trying to get people to tell folks where they're going. So how are they addressing these different concerns, essentially. Yes, so I think our goal after this meeting is again to just refine again the pitch deck and then go back and pitch this to the folks that we've already mentioned this to. So we've talked to Adrian from ARDC, we've talked to Ruben from Health RI. I've talked to some folks from the Swiss Personalized Health Network about this, from the Malaysian Open Science Cloud. We've talked to folks working on kind of putting data together in Spain, but there are many groups we haven't reached out to. So we haven't talked to Health RI, or sorry, not Health RI, HCR UK recently about this. These are just some examples. We haven't talked to the folks in Estonia. There's an initiative in Japan. So there's many more groups that we haven't gone back and reached out to. So we'll be working on that. And that's going to feed into the speaker series. So part of, yeah, sorry, I didn't put Ruben's last name, thanks. So part of what we're doing here is thinking about pitching people on this, getting them to send somebody from their group to participate in this working groups that like getting folks from those pieces to participate in the speaker series. So what the GORC IM did for their speaker series was to invite folks to participate, to present on where they were at kind of implementing open research commons for a specific domain or geography. And then also had them fill out a survey so that we could get more kind of structured metadata related to how those initiatives are being implemented or adopted. And the reason for that is that oftentimes these metadata are not present in a public facing way. So it'd be difficult to really understand these implementation decisions and to collect that metadata other than through a survey. And so we will be kind of pitching people, trying to get folks who are leading these initiatives to designate somebody from their team to participate in this working group, and then also inviting them back for the speaker series and to participate in the survey that we will be building collaboratively with the folks in the working group to making sure that we well understand the scope of these country or cross-national health data commons initiatives.
So maybe I'll ask is because as we
We'll
mentioned, like
might put just a pitch here in the chat. So maybe if do you want to just read it briefly?
Sure. I'm not going to read it verbatim, but essentially, I mean, I made a pitch for the GORC in general terms in a previous activity, and I think that there's a case to be made for being able to benchmark and kind of see the characteristics of these types of commons besides each other. So, I mean, you can see what they're doing in Australia, but you might not necessarily want to go through all of their work, and then having some sort of top level outline of what's in there, and then just describe those characteristics briefly is helpful for someone who's new and navigating the space. So I think the speaker series that went into developing the GORC, that was interesting. And I mean, the end result is the I mean, both the typology of the hexagonal shapes with the overall structure, and then you have these elements that further define, so what are good dimensions that you could compare and contrast across different implementations. I think something like that would be useful for people building commons for the health spaces as well. And I mean, then the speaker series would be a low-hanging fruit. And then if there are people who are invested in doing the curation that would be required to describe it, I mean, that end result would be probably interesting to some people in this domain.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And like the idea of benchmarking, I don't think we put that well in the case team. And I think it's a great addition. Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, we'd like to figure out how to get federated metadata to describe these health data commons, but we're not there yet. So until that time, then we would have to depend on survey data to understand kind of these changes over time and the implementation of the different concerns for health data commons. So anything else about just any other additions that folks might have to thinking about the value proposition? So how to convince folks of the value of this work? Go ahead.
Yeah.
Major.
So maybe maybe related to one of the teacher questions that you had at the beginning, you were asking whether what kind of the maturity level on FAIR. I was just wondering if there's anything. I'm not sure whether it fits in a value proposition, but how FAIR do we want to, like, what would be our message on FAIR? Do we kind of focus on adding value for groups or organizations that kind of are at the starting level already? Or do you want to kind of aim for, because I think taking a best practices approach kind of could also raise a barrier, right? People could find it very complicated because they will maybe think they will never reach that high threshold. So could we kind of phrase it in a way, maybe it's in already, could we kind of phrase it in a way that kind of attract both people and organizations that are kind of starting to think about like baby steps, which are fine as well, and that do serve or kind of challenge the best practices to go back to where they started. But if they had to redo stuff, what would they do differently to help like people that are a little bit later? So is there something in that in the text? On that in the text?
So Lauren, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we have necessarily almost like a fair maturity model built in. And that's something that's come up with the GORC model on its own, even just like what would you consider without even thinking about fair implementation, that it needs a maturity model on top of it. to say who's starting and what do you do when you're a little bit more mature or have different things implemented. So I think that's something that we do need to say and that we should absolutely build in. That does raise a concern for me around how much work it'll be to look at different maturity levels of FAIR for each item. Because I imagine there will be also like hundreds of items that are relevant for health infrastructures too. But I
Yeah.
think it's a good point because even if we can't necessarily do the full scale maturity, like maturity matrix for everything, we have found with the GORC model that it's as long as we have a good way of describing it, it is useful for both mature infrastructures and novel infrastructures. Like the model has actually been used for designing a funding proposal, which is something that hasn't even started yet.
Yeah, this is
So
exactly why I'm raising it. I'm not trying to convince you to put in all fair maturity part, because I think that's
yeah,
very challenging as well. But I was just wondering whether we don't scare off like the people the organizations that we really like that get started on stuff,
for
but
sure.
that we're just putting out those amazing practices. And so I think in the value proposition we could add a little bit like the logical stuff, like you can learn from best practices and like the comparison of best practices, take out the best elements from these models, where could you start, etc. But I was just wondering whether we have something in that value proposition to convince those a new starting organization to jump on the train, even if they already realize they're never going to reach that huge level with big organizations, because most of the organizations that are in the list are quite big organizations, have a lot of staff, etc. So how do we attract those newcomers that are only with a few people? That did answer to your main question at the beginning. I do want to take those baby steps. I'm not far yet, but I'm interested. So I think we want to learn from fresh new people as well that could kind of take away the rusty elements or the annoying elements that big organizations sometimes kind of already experience. Not enough funding, I don't know, not all stakeholders involved, all the big things that maybe newcomers are not bothered yet about and are fresh and new and just want to get started.
Yeah, I think one thing that you raised there that's really great is this idea of having groups that are more advanced talk about the challenges that they faced and what they would do differently. So I think that would be a really nice kind of section to add to the survey we send out to folks or ask folks to speak about in their presentations. And then I think also this point that groups that are starting out may have more freedom to navigate some of these challenges, which I think is very true. I feel a bit hesitant and kind of fair benchmarks, for example. So I think that is something that I personally feel like we should be a little cautious about. We're like, I think we should be clear that we're not trying to define best practice. We're trying to make visible metadata about implementation decisions. Because we don't want to say, there's one size fits all in the health data space. We know that's not true. It's not going to be possible. And I don't think we need it for interoperability. But at least, when we make clear implementation decisions, then people may decide that they want to take the same implementation decision. So I think I feel a little bit reluctant to use the word best practice, but maybe that's just me.
No, that makes sense. I think it's the same issue around like the maturity model, because maturity kind of showed like if you're only a novel starting, that you're not good enough. I know we were having, for instance, discussion within Elixir, within the newly started RDM community, and we talked about like maturity for services, like organizations offering services, and there's also this idea about not being mature enough, or it kind of gives a specific value while you don't want to give that, right? You want to invite people to learn from what others have done or would do differently. So I fully agree. Maybe we could ignore those or skip those terms that mean different things to different people, like maturity or best practice. I like good practice, but yeah.
And I think like one thing that GORC has done really well is thinking about, you know, what's required, what's like, so basically setting tiers on the types of kind of concerns that global open research commons would need to address. And I think there are, so we did some work where we looked at how FAIR was implemented for registries and platforms for the reuse of COVID-19 data. And what we found is that you know, these infrastructures for the reuse of participant level data are really themselves not fair. And we couldn't use kind of the existing tools to evaluate fairness. And we just basically broke it down into 4 criteria, one of which was, for example, did the platform or registry have a persistent identifier? And so I think we could think about, you know, what are the very basic criteria for FAIR, like a persistent identifier? And then, you know, we could think about, like, so rather than kind of having really in-depth FAIR maturity models, just think about like very basic criteria, like start at a very basic place, and then later as these infrastructures evolve, thinking more about FAIR maturity. So it could be like a next step, I think, as it is for the GORC working group. So GORC didn't, you know, initially concentrate a lot on FAIR maturity. Now they're at a point where they're looking at FAIR maturity. Maybe that would be the same for this working group.
Yeah, I might just add that so the profiles and even the fact that we want to do a knowledge graph, these things will have to change over time and be dynamic. Like there's never going to be one health profile. It'll be this is a version 1.0, and then the same way that the GORC model is going to have a version 2.0, the profiles will likely need to go through some sort of iterative process. Hopefully with things in you know, maintenance mode in RDA once the working group's finished and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think there's definitely space to expand it out. We just want to be careful not to bite off too much in the first 18 months. Lou.
Hi, sorry, I'm actually from environmental science, and we're just beginning to look at developing commons for environmental science data. And obviously we have the challenge, even within environmental science, we have lots of different domains and they're all using their different favorite vocabularies and terminologies. So one of the most impactful things that we could do is by integrating with health data. And so I wonder, are you engaging with people outside of the health domain to help implement your profile? And if I've understood correctly, I had to step out briefly, but you're essentially developing a profile that can be used across the federation of health domains, essentially. So have you thought about engaging with other communities so that you can help enrich that profile to bring together essentially the gold nugget, which would be to bring health data together with other types of data, essentially?
Yeah, and so I guess the short answer is yes, but I'm going to let Lauren answer that more fully.
Okay.
Yeah, so absolutely. I think this is a core issue here. So so I think one of the reasons why we would like to use the GORC implementation model is because that work brought together really people from across domains. So the GORC working group had really nice cross-domain participation because in a global open research commons, obviously you want it to be cross-domain. And this working group is tied to work in CODATA on a cross-domain interoperability framework. And so that's basically kind of thinking about what metadata do we need to understand these connections across domains. And absolutely our intention is to, so start in health, make those metadata fair, and then think about how health relates to, animal health, like we have One Health, ocean health, environmental exposures, climate data. And I think the real challenge, for folks who are working in the cross-domain space, so folks who are working in One Health, or working in how does climate intersect with human health, is that they are constantly having to put together these data and wrangle these data to try to make those connections. And we'd like to better understand, where are those connections already being made? So where can we put the earthquake data together with the health data and the flood data, and where are those connections just really far from being possible? Because then we can think globally, okay, we really need to invest in, metadata in the animal health space so that we can actually do One Health work. So I think part of what we're doing here is trying to get this conversation going in health, obviously in this working group, but then link it up to the conversations in other domains. And I would point to the CoData CDF work, so cross-domain interoperability framework work where they're also trying to think about, what types of metadata do we need to understand whether or not these cross-domain analyses are possible. And absolutely want to link with other groups. So that's not something that we thought about, like, reaching out to other groups. And like initially we thought about it more like, okay, when we make these metadata visible, we can see how this links to other initiatives. But I think it's a good point you raised about, like, maybe we should think about doing that earlier. So, and I think probably, the work with GORC would be a good place to try to lead that.
Yeah, and I might add in that Lauren, as you mentioned around looking where the connections are already being made, it might make sense to, we've got a very short list of people, and we definitely want to build it out. But maybe again, where we want to focus on building a health profile, we don't necessarily want to invite a full cross-domain panel right away, where we're only going to have something like 10, maybe 12, possibly 13 speaker series slots. What we would want to do is invite folks that are already working in that cross-disciplinary field and like who have intersections with health already. I think that would be really, really valuable in that first speaker series and questionnaire sets. And then working towards further and further interoperability across domains. So unless there's other questions around things around like the value proposition or things that have come to mind, I think this is a good part to segue into who else can we reach out to for health data commons, since we have folks in the BoF already, or people that are working especially in cross-disciplinary fields that intersect with health. We've got a short list here, and I had it in our slides here as well. But if there's anyone else that comes to mind that folks want to suggest today, I'd love to write them down. Because the sooner we get a bigger list, the better place we're at when we're actually ready to start reaching out to people. So we had the People's Research Data Commons from ARDC, and people have seen Andrew Trillard's name floating around here, so of course he's involved. NIH in the United States, the UK Health Data Gateway, Elixir, NFDI for health, the GA4GH, the European Health Data Space, the Malaysian Health Data Space, German Swarm Learning Network, which isn't, my understanding is that it's not necessarily an organization on its own, but it itself is a network of participating universities, which is interesting. Health RI, of course. And my understanding is that the Spanish Health Data Space is actually going to be turning into the EOSC Health Data Space, is that they want to make it a national one first and then they'll make it into health data, but I might be misunderstanding that one. And then the African Population Health Research. I have a feeling this is not council. I looked this up and it was a different word. Center. It's center. That was my bad. But is there any other people or groups that folks know of or come to mind that think that might want to be involved, either as members of the working group or just even having the ability to participate through a questionnaire or a survey or be as part of the speaker series? Who are we missing?
So I think we definitely can do some more work on the snowball sampling. Simon had told me to follow up with folks at Salurbal. So I'll just put it in the chat. I don't, I was trying to understand what's happening in terms of health data spaces in Latin America. And I think the African CDC, we don't have that here, but we could ask folks there.
Oh yeah, I mean the more generalist commons, I think, are definitely people we should reach out to, and that relates back to we also need to think about who we might reach out to that were part of the GORC speaker series already, because a lot of the GORC speakers were large pan-national or national generalist DRI infrastructures like the ARDC, which already has a people research data commons. So there it is. So add an AOSP. Assume that's going to be PDF. And so this was mostly just to showcase where our thinking is now. And of course, this list is going to have to get longer, and there's snowball sampling going to be with the folks that we reach out to individually or in groups, depending on how it goes. But just a heads up that especially around this list, we would love to see this one grow. So if you do think of more people, you can email me and Lauren and let us know, or you can come in and add it right like directly. That's all totally fine and open. But I do know that we are in our last couple of minutes. And so it might be good to pass it over to next steps and wrap up. Lauren, you want to take us away?
Sure. So like I think probably most working groups, we are envisioning monthly meetings after we have the case statement endorsed by RDA. So the case statement will be open for comments for the next couple of months. We'd like to submit the case statements in early August. And in the meantime, we'll be working on basically pitching this working group to the different health data spaces that we have in this list, and we'll be building out the list through snowball sampling. And then our goal is to start meetings, so start the actual work beginning in September after the summer break. And let's see, so we didn't yet get that I remember a chance to talk about the deliverables from this working group, but what we are aiming for here is health data commons implementation of the GORC implementation model. So basically, what do we need to refine? What do we need to add to the GORC implementation model for the health data space? And then we'd also like to actually apply those metadata to health data spaces. Again, we'd likely do that through a survey because most of those metadata aren't going to be visible or very difficult to track down for these different country level or cross-national health data spaces. And then we'd like to think about the implementation of the model for AMR and cancer so that we can really have some practical information to work from in terms of, okay, what are the investments that we need to make in AMR to enable federated data reuse across different health data commons. And then also to go back to the one speaker's points, to think about, where do health data connect or where don't they connect to data from other domains? So animal health, environmental health, climate data. So that would also be something that we'd be working towards here. And then we are looking for other co-chairs. So we've asked a couple of people, but we're very happy to bring in more co-chairs if this is something that you feel like you'd be interested in. So a commitment from a co-chair would look like generally a couple hours a month. So we will have a standing meeting as kind of a working group. We'll have a standing co-chairs meeting to prepare for that working group meeting. And then we may have some sub working groups that we get going to try to move the work quickly, more effectively, or sorry, move it forward more effectively. So for example, like a working group on omics data, a working group on research data, depending on what we're planning to do. And yeah. CJ, anything to add here?
I think I might just add that so this is a birds of a feather session. We don't have a page or anything set up on RDA yet. But because this is such a closely related group to the GORC International Model Working Group and the GORC Interest Group, any updates about this group, if you're not really sure if you want to be a member or sign up as a co-chair or anything like that, but if you're still interested in maybe hearing about it later on or even just after the plenary, please feel free to sign up for the International Model Working Group and Interest Group. And of course, those two groups also have sessions during the plenary too. So you're very welcome to go have a look at those. We'll talk a little bit more around how the model is changing. And there will, of course, be interplay between any of the GORC affiliated groups and the GORC working group, whatever new form that takes itself. So essentially, yeah, sign up for those mailing lists if you want to keep updated. But certainly signing up or putting your name down in the case statement will make Lauren and I will definitely make sure to reach out to you, and we'll be sending out a summary as requested by the 22nd plenary organizers on this session as well. So make sure you've got your contact information in our collaborative notes so that we can send out the summary to you afterwards. But if you want to keep up to date on the play-by-play, definitely sign up for the GORC working group. We'll be sending out anything through those mailing lists. And yeah, I think that's everything that Lauren and I had to talk about today. We've got a couple of minutes left until like the technical end of our session, but I just want to say thank you to everyone who came out for this. We really appreciate you being here for this Birds of a Feather. This is a new venture out of the GORC working group space, and we hope to see you around as we kind of bring it to fruition. Please feel free to email us with questions or concerns in the interim. We're interested in critical feedback as well as voicing of interest. We really want to make sure this working group does well and includes as much consideration as it can.
Great. So thanks everybody, and thanks CJ for a great facilitation as usual.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here, folks. Okay, I'm just gonna quickly put our chat things into our case statement, and I'm gonna stop my share. And Athena, I think it was recommended to, what should I say here? I think it was recommended to just close the meeting instead of clicking stop record. Is that your understanding too?
Yeah, I think it's either way, it's fine. We can just leave and then the recording will start processing it and it will be okay. No worries about that. So we can just leave, basically. Thanks a lot for this session. It was really interesting.
Yeah,
Thanks, Athena.
Thank you for helping us send links and stuff through the chat. That was super helpful.
Of course, no worries. Okay, I'll see you around. Best of luck with the rest of the sessions. Bye.
Thank you. See you.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. Thanks so much, Lauren. I guess we can drop off unless you wanted to do a debrief on another link.
Yeah, and it's really early for you. I don't know what time it is. I'm sorry for.
No, that's okay. I'll send you a Zoom link in a second. How about that?
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Bye.
See you soon.